pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing unto you, O Lord, our rock and redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. It's quite a nice day out there. Last week, I think the winter had finally got to people. Everyone looked so depressed last week. I can see smiling faces today. It's a good sign that spring is just right about. Spring is right around the corner. Today marks the first Sunday of Lent, a time of reflection and prayer as we prepare ourselves for the resurrection of Christ on Easter Sunday morning. And we begin this Lent focusing on Jesus' and temptation. Right after undergoing his first step towards his ministry of preaching, teaching, and healing, that is his baptism by John, the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted, to be tested. And at the end of the 40 days and nights of his fasting, he comes face to face with temptation, and he struggles with the questions with which we are all familiar. Who am I? To what am I called? What does it mean to be obedient to God? Now, I heard a preacher suggest that given the life expectancy in those days, Jesus was probably having a midlife crisis. I'm not sure about that, but the issues with which he is confronted are issues about life, meaning, and purpose. And he faced three kinds of temptations, and let us take a look at those. The first temptation came in this way. If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. Here he is being tempted to turn stones into bread so as to alleviate his hunger. And on the surface of it all seems normal since he had been fasting, he needed something to eat. But he is tempted to give in to the demon of self-gratification. He is tempted to abuse his position as the Son of God to fill his hunger. This was not just a casual invitation to turn stones into bread. It was an invitation to use his power to his own end. Turn stones into bread. Indulge yourself. You deserve it. Do whatever you need to get whatever you want. Don't think about the consequences. Take the easy way out. You are, after all, the Son of God. So Jesus was being invited to abuse his power to indulge in self-gratification, to take shortcuts, and not to think about consequences. And somewhere in this story we are reminded of the Israelites in the desert. They were stranded in the wilderness for 40 years, and during that time they fell victim to various temptations, hunger being one of them. And their response to the hunger they experienced was to curse God for taking them out of Egypt. We had meat and onions in Egypt, they said. You see, they forgot about the fact that they were slaves, and so they built themselves an idol, a false god, to lead them back to Egypt so that they could have food to eat. Their need to satisfy their hunger made them forget about their bitter experience as slaves. It did not matter. They wanted food, and they wanted it yesterday. And if that meant fashioning an idol, a false god that was not God at all, they were ready to do so. They disobeyed God. Now, this is the problem that we still face today. We are a people obsessed with instant gratification. We want it yesterday. And so we have fast foods and instant love, and I'm told nowadays they even have instant change and prayer. And we have quick fixes to complicated problems. And our need to feel our hunger oftentimes tend to greed. and of what we see around us. We see greedy bankers who decimate an economy and throw millions out of work in their homes. You probably heard the story that was in the news a couple of days ago, that some leaders of Dewey and DeBoff, one of the oldest and most prestigious law firms in America, have been indicted for fraud. They say that this case comes close to Enron. And at the height of this law firm, it did very well, and it employed thousands of lawyers. And today it is in bankruptcy. You see, they cooked the books to make it look as though they were making profits when they were not. They wanted to have it all instead of face up to reality. We often seem not to realize also that the problems of the world are much more complicated and they demand complicated solutions worked out over time. We want it quick, we want it now. But some things don't come easy. So the tempter was asking Jesus to use his power to gratify himself. His resolve was tested. His cause was tested. But Jesus shows us that not every problem, not all problems can be solved by throwing material things at them. See, from the perspective of the tempter, the solution to his problem was in the physical stuff. But Jesus says, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. We are tempted in many ways by the demons of consumerism. They test our resolve every day. But there's something more to life than simply using the stuff around us to fill the void of our souls. The second temptation of Jesus that Jesus faced was an invitation to jump off the pinnacle of the temple. If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you not dash your foot against a stone. Jump, so that all those people down there can see that indeed you are the Son of God. Jump, and you will not have to endure the cross, no crucifixion, no death. Take the shortcut. God will not fail you. God is going to save you. But Jesus did not believe the tempter's invitation to jump off a cliff because he knew that life would not make an exception in his case. He knew that this was an invitation to hubris, to arrogance, to pride. Howard Spencer used to say that there is an order that God has established to which all human beings are subjected. And if I think that I'm not bound by the same things that bind other human beings, I tempt God to destroy. I am as bound as any other human being by the same laws, and I ought to be bound by the same moral laws that bind others. But we see it play out all the time. A temptation on the part of powerful nations and powerful people to think that they are not bound by the same moral laws that bind the underprivileged. And so the powerful do whatever pleases them, and they don't play by the same rules as the weak. And we are seeing it play out in international politics this week. I won't go into the details, but we are seeing it play out before our very eyes. Now, Jesus would have acted on the temptation to throw himself off the temple, but he could have failed, because he was bound by the same laws that bind all human beings, including the law of gravity. He rejected to act out of pride and arrogance. As the old saying goes, pride goes before a fall. And in these two temptations, we see a common thread before we get to the third one, and it's the element of doubt that the tempter introduces. If you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. If you are the Son of God, jump. Prove it. If you are indeed the Son of God, prove it to the world. Prove that you have power. Prove that you are truly the Son of God. If Jesus had acted on these two temptations, it was going to be an act out of self-doubt. Acting on these temptations would have signaled that Jesus was in doubt of his calling as the Son of God. It would have been an act out of unbelief. For a person only tries to prove that which he himself or herself is not sure. And the third temptation is that Jesus is asked to fall down and worship the tempter so that all the kingdoms of the world would be his. Jesus is tempted to use his power to gain the kingdoms of the world, even though that was not the will of God. He is tempted to switch his allegiance from God to the demon of power and control. He's being invited to take a shortcut. Fall down and worship me, and all the kingdoms of the world will be under your control. Why go out and preach and risk rejection? Why risk arrest and death? Take it now. I'm offering it to you, pain free. All you need to do is just to bow down, and all is yours. Did Jesus not come to proclaim freedom for his people? Was this not an opportunity to free his people once and for all? Wasn't this the grand opportunity to overthrow the Romans and in its place establish his own empire? The temptation was real. It was great. For who among us would pass the opportunity to preside over empires and kingdoms of this world? Who among us would pass the opportunity to be called king or queen, to never have to wait for anything, to have all the power of this world and control in our hands? But Jesus knew that by amassing power, he would have simply become one among the many power-hungry empire builders. There would have been no difference between him and Caesar, no difference between him and Napoleon, no difference between him and the madmen who rule nations through fear and use death as a tool to punish and control. For this is the stuff of which empires are made. No one builds an empire peacefully. By acquiring empires, Jesus would have compromised his moral initiative for an opportunistic advantage. To engage in the business of building empires would have been contrary to his beliefs, to the very ideals which he came to teach. We often wish we had the power to control others, to control events around us. We like to call the shots. I have a friend who once said to me that if there's one thing she would ask God was to give her the power to control everything. And of course, he couldn't even control her kids. It was a mistake that Adam and Eve made. They wanted to gain that which they felt they did not have. Wisdom and control. They wanted more power and influence. And in the end, they lost it all. Jesus said, what profiteth thee to gain the whole world and lose your soul? The issue for us this Lent is, can we trust God when temptation comes our way? Amen.